Hello, BookTube, and welcome back to the Library Tour of Doom, constructed by Lord Ganesha in his typical casual, indifferent, crushing way to go through every one of the books in my library, book by book, day by day. And you might think, but Steve, that's thousands of days. Yes, this is probably a 10-year library tour. This is going to go on forever. Because we're not just doing the books on my shelves, we're doing all the books that have ever been on my shelves. We're going to the archives, to my book ledgers and whatnot from years past, in order for me to hold up a picture. I haven't quite done many of them yet, but in order for me to hold up a picture of a book that I no longer own and tell you what I think about it. And also all the books on my iPad that aren't printed books at all. It'll take some time. But I wanted to finish out March with some mysteries from March Mystery Madness, big BookTube event that's taking place. I'm one of the hosts with a bunch of other great BookTube channels where we're celebrating all things murder mystery all month long. So I've been talking about murder mysteries in the Library Tour of Doom, and that's going to be true today as well. These are courtroom murder mysteries. They will be familiar to some of you. They are very familiar to me. I love them. These are the Rumpole stories of John Mortimer. Rumpole of the Bailey, an old Bailey hack who lives on the thin pickings of legal aid and defends the innocent and sometimes the guilty against the purblind indifference of the London legal system in number 3 Equity Court. And the book we have in mind today, the book that I'm talking about today, is one that had been foreshadowed for a long time. I think this came out in like 2003. But it had been foreshadowed in John Mortimer's Rumpole stories for decades. And that is this: Rumpole and the Penge Bungalow murders. And the reason these have been foreshadowed because Rumpole, when we meet him in these stories, is an old duffer. He has a grown son. He lives in the Gloucester Road with his imperious wife Hilda, she who must be obeyed. And he is never going to be a judge. He's never going to be a QC. He's never going to have his bottom on a silk cushion. He's never going to do any of that. He's just a hack in harness. And that's what he's going to stay. And everybody knows that about him. So there's a bit of... he's constantly entering into the legal lists with more titled members as his leaders in the team of solicitors, where he is the junior member, even though he's been at his chamber a long time. He hasn't advanced in the social ladder, and is probably not going to advance. So from time to time, in the course of those early stories, he has to remind people, sometimes a bit indignantly, that he started off his legal career really with the Penge Bungalow murder mystery, in which he brought home victory alone and without a leader, in which he was the star and got his name in notable British trials. But John Mortimer constantly has him allude to that, but never actually tells us the story. We never hear it. Until finally, decades later, he decided to write it in a book. John Mortimer, by this point, had moved away from Rumpole's short stories and was writing, at a fairly stately pace, one a year, a new Rumpole novel. And a lot of those novels are really good. They're really, really good. I didn't really expect that. A lot of inveterate short story writers can't do this. But John Mortimer also wrote novels that didn't have anything to do with Rumpole. And a couple of them are masterpieces of English prose in the 20th century. So I shouldn't have worried. And this is terrific. This is as close as we're ever going to get to a Rumpole origin story. It tells us the earliest encounters with Hilda, with she who must be obeyed, before she was his wife. It tells us the earliest encounters with a lot of the people from what would go on to become his years and years old home at number 3 Equity Court. It tells us a lot about what makes Rumpole. And it also gives us a mystery. This is fitting for March Mystery Madness because John Mortimer does construct these things at least a little bit around figuring out what happens in a scenario. It's never what it originally appears. It's always something else. And it's fun watching Rumpole get to that real explanation, no matter how he does it, no matter how he does. Usually, underneath the surface of these stories, usually Rumpole gets to the hidden solution to what looks obvious. I know this is going to seem a little weird, especially you Rumpole fans are going to maybe bridle this a bit, but he usually gets to that conclusion by being smarter than everyone else. it's the last thing. The reason that I'm hesitant to say it is because it's the last thing in the world that anybody would say here, but that is usually the case. He usually connects the dots faster than anybody else, even the people who have the same information around him. I kind of like that. I also like the way John Mortimer absolutely does not stress that. So your Library of Doom for today is a winner. You can jump into Rumpole anywhere and enjoy it. And it's a whole mythos. And I've written about Rumpole many, many times and pointed out many, many times what others have pointed out before me, which is that it's one of the most effective comic British mythos, just mythological lands since Jeeves and Wooster. It really is almost that good. So I highly encourage, I highly recommend. And there are lots and lots of other Rumpole books on my shelves. And you might think, well, surely this is a stand-in for all of them, but don't make me get Lord Ganesha involved. That's not how the Library Tour of Doom works. Okay? We're going through every single book. Okay? So you're going to have this same diatribe about Rumpole hundreds of times. So I hope you're looking forward to that. But in the meantime, I'm going to wrap this up. But I'll be back. Thank you, BookTube.